And then after the film, we'll have a conversation, which is the most important part of this particular venue, to actually engage in a conversation about what we just saw, a critical analysis. Claude Marks is the project director for Freedom Archives, a radical political, cultural, oral history project in San Francisco. Under his direction, the Freedom Archives has developed an extensive educational and youth training curriculum. As a producer, he and his Freedom Archives, he at the Freedom Archives have released numerous documentary CDs and videos combining restored historical media and contemporary interviews. In fact, Claude has bought some materials that he would like you to take home with you, very important pieces of history that he'll talk about. The most recent featured videos, COINTELPRO 101, which we've screened here for those of you that may have seen it. Very important piece that Kathleen Cleaver's in, a lot of the Geronimo Pratt and others are in that particular film. And A Legacy of Torture, a film that we'll be bringing here to the Charles Wright about the political prisoners, the Black Liberation Army, and that particular fight. These films have been shown internationally and nationally. Other recent videos focus on political prisoners, Jalil Montequin, I believe, David Gilbert, and Hun Washington. In 2004, the Freedom Archives produced an audio CD and accompanying book and resource guide entitled Robert F. Williams, Self-Respect, Self-Defense, and Self-Determination, an audio documentary as told by Mabel Williams. Currently in production is another video, which we have here. Actually, this is a previous introduction. So he has made the gains to produce the video, Symbols of Resistance, which explores the history of Chicano resistance and U.S. government repression against a movement challenging the legitimacy of U.S. colonialism against the Mexican people. Claude remains a prison activist, helped found the movement to free the San Francisco 8, and uses writing, media, and social media to educate, advocate for prison abolition and the freeing of all political prisoners. We embrace that as well. He was imprisoned in the U.S. for his support of the Puerto Rican independence movement and his commitment to anti-imperialism. I'd like to introduce, and can you join me in welcoming Claude Marks?
Thanks so much for being here. I'm not into flattery, so I'm going to dodge some of that. But I wanted to point out a couple of people that are going to join me after the film. Diana Rivera, who's an old friend, who's at MSU, and Nathaniel Moore, who's my coworker at the Freedom Archives, and part of the collective that's made the film that you're about to see. I wanted to...
I just want to also introduce him.
Sure. Yeah. The reason we undertook this film is that in making COINTELPRO 101, which if you haven't seen it, we have copies that you can purchase or you can actually view it on our website. In it, we tried to talk about the history of U.S. government repression against some of the more significant movements in the U.S. And within that film, there's a whole section about the Chicano struggle, which had really not been either written about or documented in other places, mainly because we wanted people to understand the context of government repression was not limited to the Black Panther Party, but was very broad and covered a lot of the Black liberation struggle. That the Native American struggles were targeted, that the Puerto Rican independence movement was targeted, but the Chicano struggle was also targeted. And so, as an outgrowth of that, we undertook to bring a more in-depth piece to you called Symbols of Resistance, which we'll see, that it's not a story of the entire Chicano movement. We're trying to focus on some of the oral history and the stories that are largely in Colorado and northern New Mexico, just simply to give it some focus and some the humanity of the people who sacrificed their lives in the same era as the black struggle and the Native Americans were being attacked, in the same era that there were Puerto Rican independence fighters that were imprisoned or assassinated. So that is the genesis of this film. So view it as not a complete story, but as a way to open that door. And afterwards, Deanna will actually help us with a more concrete look from the standpoint of, Michigan and the area around here, because these issues have, have total impact where you all are living here in Detroit. So, having said that, you want to step back up for a sec, Charles, and then we'll start the film, and please join us afterwards for conversation.
Prior to the program, I want to reach out into the Chicano community and find some key activists to come and join us to open up the program. I didn't actually see Antonio Cosme standing there, but I wanted to bring him up front just to say a few words. He was going to introduce Claude Marks. He's an indigenous writer, educator, artist, beekeeper, and farmer in Southwest Detroit, having graduated from Eastern Michigan University with double majors in political science and economics at the time when the state took over the city of Detroit through emergency management. A great deal of his work has been dedicated to lecturing, writing, and acting in opposition to the neoliberal assault on the city. Antonio found Raiz Up, an art collective in 2012, a Chicano and indigenous hip-hop collective using art as a way to create consciousness and support movement, #Rise Up. Antonio has organized with the People's Water Board and We the People of Detroit Against Shutoffs, the Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management Committee to Ban Graphing, Alumni Against EAA, and Detroit Eviction Defense. Very much an activist. But more than just resisting the abuse of public goods, land, water, and people, Antonio is working to transform his community through organized artistic endeavors and ecological community development. I want to introduce him, and we'll be embracing his work here at the Charles Wright as we look to build really a cross-cultural community. Particularly for the night, we have the Rebellion programming. We're going to have a major concert that night, and we're going to walk out to our sculpture, United We Stand, and have a brief rally around key issues that we stand for. So I'd like to introduce him to the community. You can say a few words if you like, very briefly, and we'll move on to the film.
That's a step up, then you wouldn't be able to see me otherwise. Yeah, I was doing a workshop over at the Allied Media Conference, and I've been over there a lot this weekend. And I'm happy, it feels like super fortuitous that I was meant to introduce you to this event, because very much so I feel like a child of that movement, of the Chicano movement. My father was actually, he sold Chicano art at festivals when I was young. I remember just being at festivals selling Azteca and Chicano-oriented art and t-shirts and swag and gear. And he kind of was younger. He was around the time the Chicano movement was kind of tailing off after its peak. So I kind of feel very deeply connected to that. One of my mentors, Rivera, he was targeted by COINTELPRO here in Detroit. And he was part of bringing the Young Lords chapter to here in Detroit. And he and I were speaking on a panel yesterday for this conference. It's actually a network gathering that was part of the Allied Media Conference, where we brought together activists, artists, educators, and folks from Puerto Rico to speak with Detroiters and connect on emergency management and bankruptcy. As a Chicano, indigenous, Boricua, oriented, identified person, I had to watch my own city go into bankruptcy and go into what I would call a neo-colonial takeover in the 2012 bankruptcy. only for those same people who engaged in that bankruptcy to fly straight to Puerto Rico and do the exact same thing. It's a tool of austerity. It's very much so what the United States has been doing to Latino America for the last 30 years, or for the last 45 years, since 1973, when we overthrew the democratically elected Allende in Chile. And it's the same system of enforcing these free market fundamentalist oriented policies that happened in Chile in 73 that are being implemented on Detroit in 2012. It's the same set of policies. Privatization is the name of the game. You know, and they're going after our water, they're going after our schools, our public lighting, our trash systems, all of these systems that are meant for the public good, things that are intended to be controlled and owned by all of us collectively, are being moved into the private sphere for profit. One of the first industries that's being taken over by robots is actually the financial industry. There are complex algorithms that are doing all of the things that Wall Street people used to do. So all those unemployed Wall Street people are coming here and running our schools, running our universities, and running our city institutions. So I see the fight against imperialism, the fight against neocolonialism in Latin America, and the fight against emergency management in Detroit as one fight and one struggle. And I'm honored to be up here standing and introducing you, Claude, and I look forward to watching this film and engaging in conversation around some of these systems afterwards.
The director, who's the producer, and I just say, this is the crew. Nathaniel is part of the crew and is on staff with the Freedom Archives along with myself. He'll say something brief, and then we'd like to ask an old friend, Diana Rivera from MSU, to also chime in. And then let's open up for conversation.
Thanks. I'm Nathaniel. I'm the archivist at the Freedom Archives. Sure. I'm Nathaniel. I'm the archivist at the Freedom Archives. This was the first time that we showed this in a group of people, so I actually should have been maybe writing down what I was going to say or thinking about some larger, comments. So I'm going to do that right now and just kind of think a little bit about some of the things that struck me throughout the couple years that we've been working on this. And I just want to say thanks to all of you for showing up and taking it in with us. I think the thing that struck me about watching it in this particular environment this time that maybe didn't strike me through the hundreds of times that I've watched this previously to now was really how it on one hand, when you watch it, it is very specific in terms of the people in which it talks about, the years in which it covers, and the locations that it focuses on. But I was also thinking, I was able to walk around a little of the museum before this started, and also just as I think about the political moment we're in, and so much of the issues that folks were dealing with then still resonate today in terms of what we're dealing with, and not just in the Chicano community or the Black community or the Native community or whatever specific community you want to refer to, but just across the board. And so the importance of young people in terms of really pushing a change. And as I was walking around the first floor of this museum, I saw a photo exhibit about how young people from a high school were tasked with talking about what was beautiful in Detroit and what was changing in Detroit. And so I was looking at a number of those pictures and reading the captions and thinking about how vibrant young folks are in terms of pushing the movements forward and really creating the context and the conditions for a change. So that's one thing that kind of struck me about this. The other thing that, or one more thing I'd like to bring to the table, one of the things we do with the Freedom Archives a lot, one of kind of our core values is connecting the past and the present, and specifically doing that through thinking about history not as something that stays isolated, but as something that continues, and all of us, even today, are living history and creating history. And so I'm thinking about that in the way, again, of connecting the political moment, right? And so that while in many ways so much of the things that folks were struggling with in the 60s and the 70s have changed, so much of it is still the same. Thinking about police violence, thinking about when the Wounded Knee section was coming up, thinking about Standing Rock and the repression that took place there within the past year and a half, and thinking about all the ways in which it's really important, in order to help move these struggles and movements forward, to produce media, produce materials, and really facilitate a robust way for people who are living today and really understand the conditions in their own context to be able to make the connections with older folks who participated in those struggles and learned a lot of the lessons that we're learning today, but back then, and how useful some of those lessons can be in terms of informing our own choices and decisions and strategies and tactics and all of those pieces. And so I think that not only fits in a lot with what, as the Freedom Archives, were trying to do, but also with so much of what I've seen, whether it be at the conference that we're participating in, or just seeing around people all around this country. I think that, and yeah, I guess just to conclude that, looking at kind of the final conclusion and part of the, so the last thing I'll talk about is kind of a little bit about the filmmaking process, right? Because Claude mentioned that we're a collective, and so that might be kind of interesting to engage just briefly, and I'll kind of wrap it up with that. And so a lot of the fabric of this film was created by the 30 plus years of relationships that were cultivated. So a lot of the folks that were in the movie, we didn't just randomly solicit them for their perspective. And we didn't just arbitrarily find them in some history book and say, that person is important, let's interview them. These are people that we've been working with for years. These are people that members of the team have been struggling with for years. In fact, one of the members of our team that is not here tonight was actually one of the people who was filming the footage at the 1972 La Raza Unida convention. So very much so was a part of this. And so I think it's that type of intergenerational relationship building and mentorship that's really formative, again, to allowing young people the space to both develop on their own in response to their own conditions, but still be informed by a really important history that clearly is shaping the conditions that we live in. I think another thing that makes kind of the film collective interesting is not just the intergenerational piece, but also the multiracial, multigender, just diversity amongst the film crew. So the narrator that you heard is Brenda. Brenda was a member of our film crew, and Brenda was also an intern at the Freedom Archives. So again, showing that the relationship building that takes place really does create the fabric in which a lot of these things can be made. And so I think that it's that type of relationship building and that type of context, which is why we wanted to end the film with the dedicated to the next generation, in that knowing that there's still so much to struggle for, as one of the participants in the film said, how do we create structures and mechanisms to, again, open space for young people to genuinely do what they're going to do on their own, but yet provide that support. And I'm really honored as a part of this crew to have that kind of mentorship. And so that was really important to me, and I was thinking about that as we were viewing this. So I'm gonna stop now and move it along, but I just again want to really reiterate how honored we are to be here, and thank you so much for participating in the conversation that we're going to have.
Hi, my name is Diana Rivera. I am the Chicano and Latino Studies Librarian at Michigan State University. I am a graduate of Michigan State University with my undergrad in racial and ethnic studies. Graduating at a time when a lot of this was happening. I think I'd like to, when I speak at places, I always like to bring in the Midwest or the Great Lakes perspective, because that was my reality. Okay, that was the reality that classmates from Michigan, from Ohio, from Illinois, the things that we were experiencing. Very few issues were different than what people in California or in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico and Colorado is a little bit different to an extent, but the things that they were going through were the things that, you know, states away, a couple of thousand miles away, are the things that we were experiencing here too. I speak as someone who came from a rural farming community. I have very little background as far as what the connection or the interconnection between the African American community and the Mexican American or the Chicano community had, that interconnection that they had in places like Detroit, in Kalamazoo, maybe in Saginaw, maybe in Flint. I can speak to some of that, but that's not to say that interconnection did not exist, because of the closeness of what our Latino community had, and the affinity and the affiliation and the brotherhood and sisterhood that they had in Detroit. You know, and we have a person who has been quite active in the Detroit community here with us tonight, that maybe she can go ahead and share some of that with us. Are most of you from Detroit?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you may be familiar with the name Elena Herrada.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so, and you know the warrior woman that she is, and that she has been since her teen years, and as she continues to do today. What I do want to talk about, though, a little bit is, you know, how to open this phone, really, okay, is that in talking about the experience of Latinos in the Great Lakes states, okay, and I like to talk about it in those terms, the Great Lakes states rather than the Midwest, because that kind of gets us into Kansas and Missouri and those areas. But not only did we find activism and militancy among our community during that time period, and the time period before, or the few years before, and then after into the 70s. But we saw that the differences between our communities in the Midwest, or in the Great Lakes area, and the communities in the Southwest, the struggle, the fight was the same. The issues were the same. In California, we had Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, the farm workers struggle. In Texas, you know, the housing, the discrimination, education issues, you know, and it's interesting how little has changed. Because right now, what are we having in Texas, if not having our history not included in textbooks for elementary and high school students there? We had the activists, the Brown Berets, and we had La Raza Unida groups here. And I think that you may remember these were some of the groups that were discussed in the film. UMAS was present here in Michigan too. The difference that I see occurred between them and us is that while New Mexico and Colorado were fighting the land grant right, lands that they wanted to reclaim, in Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, you find that we had no history here. Not the way we had the history of the Southwest. We had no claims to land on the Spanish side of our history. We had no claims to land in the Midwest. That was not a fight that we could actually participate in from here. It's not that we didn't support it. We did support those claims. It's not that we didn't support the United Farm Worker and the issues that were going on. And you know why? It's because we were having the same issues here. California and the Southwest had the United Farm Workers. In Ohio and in this region, we had FLOC, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. In Ohio in particular, the issues that they were battling were the tomatoes, you know, but when you're talking about farm worker plights, these are the things that the students in this area who were supporting, you know. They were doing it through marches and sit-ins. You know, they were yelling at politicians. We do not have a history of having the amount of violence towards our students as we see in this film. We were beat up, yes. We were arrested, yes. We were detained, yes. But there has not been a recorded history necessarily where we have, as students, been systematically killed. What is it that becomes threatening to a system that you find people being killed, being bombed? And I think for the Southwest, it may have been that people like Raiz was contesting, was asking back from the government for our lands to be returned. What were we asking for here? We were asking for clean water. We're still asking for clean water. We're asking for fair housing and safe housing, equal education, or equal opportunity to education, same things that they were there. But you know what? Very little has changed. Sure, you know, some of us have gone to college, some of us have gotten our degrees. And the pessimist in me says that very little has changed because our population has grown. And the biggest threat to our survival becomes the current administration and the policies that they are enacting. And I'd say that he was enacting, that 45 was enacting, but he's a puppet. I think that you are correct when you're talking about having it be a multi-generational effort to keep things moving forward. I called four guys who were students in the movement. I consider them older than me, but they're only like 7 years older than me, really. But for me, that was a lifetime because they were involved. They were involved in, like I said, I came from a little farming town. But it was those perspectives that I called upon to have verified what the things that we had been learning through the Chicano Studies program at MSU. The things that we were learning in our communities that, you know what, I wasn't that far off target when we're talking about the threat that our communities become to the government. Probably the closest infiltration, I should say, by the FBI into our communities in Michigan, in Madison, Wisconsin, and Chicago, Illinois. They happened to two of our friends. Gilberto Martinez was one of the co-founders of, or actually, I won't claim for him that he was a co-founder of La Razón Unida Party, along with Jose Angel Gutierrez. But having moved to Michigan and doing community activism, or being an activist in the community, both as someone who started a newspaper and an organization and a student at MSU, and the FBI trailed him. The FBI bugged his offices and the meetings. We find that other sources of FBI infiltration, or at least where they were spied upon, are as close as Chicago with the Young Lords Party. And we find other activists in the Southwest that, the FOIA, the FBI reports, the transcripts are available. We were just a tiny part of Chicano activism, but at some point we became a threat as far north and as far east as we were for these people to be spied upon. I want to kind of throw a plug out there for Michigan State University libraries. Michigan State University is a land grant institution, which means that it's an institution that serves the population of Michigan. At Michigan State University, we have a fairly good collection on Chicano studies. Actually, I'd say it's very, very good. And in trying to get more information, as far as primary sources, please know that at MSU we have films, we have audio recordings, we have the papers of some of these activists, and we have microfilm, materials on microfilm. We have a large presence in digital media as well. So if you are interested in finding out more information on the Chicano movement, not just in Michigan, but in the country, as a Michigan resident, you have the right and the privilege to request material interlibrary loan. Probably things like primary source material will not be loaned, but as a resident, you have, and Michigan State being a land grant institution, you have the ability to walk in and use those materials. Yeah.
Coming from Detroit forever and being, Detroit, Mexican, which is a really different thing, like you say. It's a very different thing about growing up in a place where we were a tiny minority until NAFTA. We were like 1% of Mexicans in a city that was about 85 to 90% black for most of my life growing up. And so the struggle had a really different kind of flavor here for us. And we always said we were small but mighty. And we were loud because we have Chicano Boricua Studies that remains today in a very strong way at Wayne State. And we have, under the Coleman Young administration, we had 5 Latino appointees, 5 Chicano appointees. We've never had that many people appointed to the mayor's office before or since. As, like people who were actually in the inner circle, making decisions and representing the community. Not these lackeys you see running around with Duggan. So I'm talking about like people who were really, they were proud, they made us proud, the struggles that we were in were often together with the black community. There was more of that quite a while back, unlike now. We have a very different sort of reality now. But when we were a tiny portion of the community, I would say that in many ways, the Brown Berets in Detroit and the Black Panthers in Detroit were very collaborative. And the reality of land ownership was a really different thing, because we came, our families mostly came around 1920 to Detroit. And there were others, and people could say that we had claims to land, but I don't think any of us thought about that. We didn't think about owning much of anything. Most of us came here to work, and our families came here to work in auto. So we were an industrial group as opposed to agricultural, like the people in the Texas farm workers movements and the California farm workers movements. But Cesar Chavez had boycott offices in every major city in the country, and we had a UFW boycott office here that was very supported by the UAW, and we definitely had black-brown solidarity in a way that we really don't now. And the struggles, I think, were more on behalf of prisoners, they were more on behalf of farm workers, they were more on behalf of really poor people. And so there was a very grassroots vibe to everything, and we didn't really have anything. We didn't have any funding, we didn't have any money, we didn't have anything, but we had a powerful movement. I think anybody could say who was there and grew up during that time. Cesar was here a lot. Cesar stayed at our house many, many times. We had to cook that macrobiotic food for him. It was awful. And we did a lot of hospitality for people around in the movements. So the kind of reality that we were talking about, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, I really do have a question. The question that I have, and I didn't experience this until I went to Michigan State, was that were there people who were in the Chicano movements around the Midwest who actually did tie in with the sort of like the Aztlan struggle that we didn't really sense here because people had come out of farm worker movements at Michigan State? I'm sorry, that took a long time to say. Okay, sorry.
So were there people
Like in the Chicano movement?
in the Chicano movement who were from the Southwest? Or can you restate that? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm asking basically if outside of Detroit and the rest of the areas that were actually rural, were there people that were connected up with the movements for like Aztlan and the treaties and that we were not involved in here?
Not that I recall, actually. I know that we had grad students from California who came in to be part of programs, and they brought the message with them. They, they worked with the undergrads primarily because we were primarily an undergrad population, student population at MSU. We had very few grad students. And, that's how we got involved in boycotts and marches and cursing of the grapes at Myers in Michigan, but also, or at Michigan State, but also there were the smaller collaborations that we had with places like Central Michigan University or Western Michigan University or Delta College that kind of brought us together because of some of these grad students. The land, not so much.
Hi, my name is Cosme. I did enjoy the film. I am going to praise you for the film. It's much needed. You asked a question about how we connect with it, and there was a woman in the film, I believe it was Miss Falcone, who spoke about the memory, and one thing this film brought out was this ancestral memory, and I've been thinking about before seeing this film. Just recently discovered a book on Rosa Parks that tells you everything about Rosa Parks you never learned in school, you know, and she was a radical. And I think about how our history gets so diluted and whitewashed that we don't, they don't want us to know about martyrs. They don't want us to know about the people that died for us, because it changes the whole way that we think about reality. They sanitize our history. And when we talk about occupied land, then you think about people coming from other lands here as if it's the land of the home of what they call the brave and the free. And that is propaganda, you know, and we internalize that propaganda. And films like this help correct the record. And I think it's important, you know, because like I say, the history that we learn and ingest that inform us is incomplete, woefully incomplete. You know, I do the same thing related to New African history. I don't call myself an African American, because I do recognize this is occupied land. I do not want to identify with the United States. I'm born here. This is the only land that I know, but it doesn't make me have to identify with or show loyalty, commitment, or allegiance to this land. That's like, you know, me moving to Palestine, otherwise known as Israel, and thinking I'm a free person and it's a democracy, when, you know, all of this foolishness is going on to the Palestinian people, the people that we know are indigenous to that land. So it's very important, and I do think this is a very important contribution to correcting the record.
Claude, can you speak just for a moment about the items in front of you, just to inform the audience of what you have, and you can give a little bit of history for each of the piece that you have that's available for sale on your merchandise table?
Well, we brought a few of the, we have a lot of raw materials in the archive. If you take a brochure, go to our website and poke around, because it's really meant to be a place where there's primary source stuff about a lot of struggles. And at the same time, we feel an urgency to address exactly, Cosme, what you said, which is, it's not enough to sit on this stuff and have it in the community and have it available, but rather, how do we promote the stories that are actually embodied in it? And, we've been working on the film that you saw for 4 years almost, really. I mean, it's a labor of love. We don't roll in with, cash heavy and with all this stuff. Literally, by the seat of our pants, we've been flying back and forth to connect with these folks in Colorado to make this possible, and through a lot of support from other people who hold on to history, we come up with the footage that you are able to see. And, with one exception, we don't have the means of paying for it. So if somebody really says you can't use it unless, and we raise the money. You saw a copy of the film that still needs to be subtitled. The sound mix still hasn't happened. There's a section in Spanish that needs to be readable in English for people who speak Spanish. The film needs to be read in Spanish. So, we're close. But we do other stuff. So, Lisa Williams is in the room. We've been working with her family for many years as well. We were able to sit down with Mabel Williams, and when was this? I don't know, years ago, and create a story of Robert and Mabel Williams in their voice. There's a slight amount of narration in this, but really Mabel was the storyteller, and Rob's voice is in there because of the historical material that we have access to. That's a very different approach to restoring history. We're not interviewing historians and experts. We're letting the people who lived this tell their story. And I think you saw that in this. We do the same thing in this film. which is about, you know, the counterinsurgency program of the U.S. government. There's different sections in it, and the story is told by people who lived through this and experienced it. You know, whether it's the murder of Fred Hampton or the story of Leonard Peltier, who's still a political prisoner. Whether it's, you know, the murder of Filiberto Ojeda Rios in Puerto Rico, or the people who survived prison and managed to return to their island. And the Chicano struggle, as I said, is in this film for what I think is one of the first times dealing with it as an anti-colonial struggle, as a struggle that's rooted in both Spanish colonialism and U.S. colonialism. And then, you know, we were very blessed to bring Mabel and John Williams to the Bay Area, and this is an interesting piece because it pairs Mabel Williams with Kathleen Cleaver, two different generations of women who have experience with the issue of armed self-defense and the black struggle, introduced by Angela Davis. So none of those folks had ever sat down together. And here was an event we created, and we felt it was so significant that we wanted to record it and kind of piece it together into something that tells yet another story. So that's what we do. I think we've said this, but not enough. We really appreciate, Charles, you helping us be part of this community, even for a brief period of time. You know, I've been blessed to come here before, and every time I learn from you all, because I don't know Detroit very well. And yet the history here is incredibly rich. It's why we wanted Deanna to be part of this, because we can't speak to the Great Lakes experience for the Chicano Latino struggle and movement.
Claude, can you just, for each piece that you referenced, let the audience know what the price is, the cost, so that they can take those pieces with you?
So I won't waste our time.
Okay, very good.
But, you know, if people want to get it, but you can experience all this online for free if you don't have the money. That's the other thing.
What's the plan for the film that you guys made here? I mean, it was really a really powerful piece. And yeah, is it available on the website yet? I'd totally be interested in screening it in Southwest Detroit. But yeah, it's like, what's the plan for like distribution, or like, what's the timeline for, you know, finishing it up with subtitles and all that sort of stuff?
Our plan is to do, kind of a finished premiere in August in San Francisco, which is where we're based. And then the folks in Colorado are gonna pick it up and do an initial tour in September. And then it'll go to Texas and other parts of the country. So our hope, we still have to, raise a little more money, blah, 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 but anyway, we're really wrapping it up. And we're not necessarily gonna put it online immediately, because we're hoping that by touring the film, we're not only gonna support the movements that use it as an organizing tool, but we're also hoping that it can help to recoup some of the costs of making it, which are not huge. I mean, the budget for COINTELPRO was $15,000, which is nothing if you're a filmmaker. I mean, it's nothing. We were blessed to be able to recoup that. Similarly with Symbols of Resistance. But we want to get it out there, and we want it, we want people to, this film is used extensively starting with high school classes. It should be there. We're not trying to create a commercial relationship to the educational process. That's not our goal. Our goal is to get this into the hands of a school or a library, into the movements, into people who want to use it to organize. And the genesis, as I said in the beginning, of Symbols is that folks in Colorado who were in the COINTELPRO film were using it to organize and said, oh, we need more, we need, you know, we're doing this big thing around the Martyrs, why don't you come down and document it? So they asked us to do it, and we did.
Yeah, definitely would love to get it out here, screened out here too in Southwest Detroit. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
We'll make it possible.
Okay.
I do.
I'm Wardell Montgomery. I would like to know, what was the experience like in terms of making the film, the people that you talked to, the reference that you got, and I guess the response of people who were part of the film that you talked to. What was that experience like? And also, what are the opportunities of film festivals around the country and outside of the country in terms of it becoming part of film festivals all around? So kind of fill me in with some of that.
In terms of the response, I think it's been, as kind of it's been alluded to a little bit, it's been really powerful because a lot of the folks, it's not the first time they've told their story, but maybe it's the first time that large groups of people have experienced that telling. So I think in addition to the original event that was very emotional, I think people are really, the people that were involved in it and other organizers are really receptive and really, it's not even about appreciate their story, but are empowered that there are other people who also still care about their struggle and want that to be a part of how we view the work. In terms of film festivals, it's a little bit, it's not a touchy topic, but a lot of film festivals aren't interested in this type of thing because of the content. You know, it's not a neutral film where we try to present both sides. You know, so we don't go and interview Harry Brunson's family and try to ask, you know, how do you think your father was feeling? You know, it's not like that. So because we take a non-neutral position and we really are focused on self-determination and these types of things, some film festivals are very open to that, and for those, we'll definitely be thinking about it. Unfortunately, some are not. I think that that's kind of part of the next stage of the process that Claude spoke to, in that once we finally get some of the final little, like I don't want to call it administrative, but mastering stuff done, we're also gonna, you know, try to enter it in a couple film festivals and see what happens. But in terms of kind of the Sundance and the Con, and you know, they're never gonna go to anything like this, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to interject. The security team has let us know that there's a gray Honda Element parked on the circle out in front. And if that vehicle belongs to anyone here, please move it before it gets up. Thank you very much.
Hit us up so we can be in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thanks for coming through.
Oh, this is the last question.
I just wanted to add, you know, I don't, you know, the line between being a documentary person and an activist is intentionally fuzzy in our situation. Priscilla and Ricardo owned an Adobe in Alamosa when I met them in the 70s. And I helped dig a trench to get it on grid so that they could have sewage and fresh water. So I've known them for a good part of my life. And to me, the film is sort of a catharsis of being able to give back, being that I do media work. And I think that's true, you know, for us as a collective of people in many ways. As Nathaniel said, Andreas, with whom I've worked since the early 70s, was one of the people who shot some of that black and white footage in 1972. So he too, you know, had, you know, because of our age, you know, we've really seen ourselves in a relationship as media producers to community and struggle, and we don't really separate ourselves. And that organic relationship elicits a very different kind of interview. So when we made the COINTELPRO film, Priscilla had never been interviewed about the murder of Ricardo Falcone, ever, and was very reluctant to do it. It really happened because of who we were and our history, more than, oh, well, this crew's coming in, we got $10,000 that we're waving at folks, and you know, that's the payoff for bearing your soul. I mean, it's very different. And part of what we would argue and did at the Allied Media Conference is to intentionally push people to blur those lines so that, you know, I think Charles, I was showing him an interview that was part of something that I did with Geronimo G. Jaga about coming to Detroit during the rebellion as a member of the U.S. military and tasked with putting the rebellion down, which you're going to utilize here. And you know, that's the kind of cathartic thing that is in my opinion, a responsible way to be somebody with media skills, as opposed to, I want to appropriate your story and become famous because of it. That's the last thing in the world we want to do, you know, because there's more stories to tell. So if we succeed with this one, we move on to something else.
This is our last question for the night.
It's a very fine film. Thank you so very much. The Chicano struggle. When I hear that word, those words, Chicano struggle, the one thing that I hear that is not part of our struggle, and our struggles are very similar, is the land. The land. Feeling as though the land was taken. Is there peace being made with that? I mean, what is the feeling amongst Chicanos regarding the land? Am I asking that correctly? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Okay.
I don't know that there's been a lot done in the area of reparation. As a matter of fact, I think the historical records are intentionally either lost or blurred, but the government is not going to go back, you know, a couple hundred years to try and get anyone their land back. I think that when we start talking about whose land it was, it's kind of an iffy place to stand when it wasn't our land to begin with. You know, sure, we're part indigenous, and you know, but the other part of us is Spanish, European. It is a very, very iffy argument to say, you know, my family had that land grant, you know, 200 years ago, and who had it before then? When do they get their reparation?
How do you make peace with that? I mean,
Well, you know, I come from a different part of the country where, I mean, my family was given land by the Catholic Church for having helped indoctrinate the indigenous around the missions in San Antonio. We came up to Michigan, you know, almost 60 years ago. It's a for my family in the Michigan area, you know, that's a connection that's been long severed. For the family in San Antonio, that's a totally different question.
I would like to ask if we could all come together and give our great panelists an applause. I completely missed everything, but I know that it was amazing. I'm just hearing the pieces that I heard and speaking in what I did hear from time to time. I want to say thank you to the three of you all for spending your time, your energy, and your love, especially for sharing with us. I want to thank all of you all for coming and spending your evening, this wonderful, beautiful Detroit evening here with us, discussing and talking about the Chicano movement, the struggle. And we encourage you to come back to the museum time and time again. We have an amazing array of programs and events and activities that are going on. Check us out on the website. Tomorrow we will have, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Mildred Gaddis will be here with Dina Harris talking about homeownership here in the city of Detroit. If you're interested in becoming a homeowner, there are paths to that and ways to make it happen for yourself. You will be able to meet and hear from brokers and realtors and all of those folks who know how to make it happen and get some good information from counselors to give you help if you need support in that. Later on in the afternoon, we will be discussing the 184th anniversary of the 1833 rebellion here in the city of Detroit. So we got history, and then moving forward into the next week, we have an amazing dance concert. I don't know if you've seen the flyer on our table. One of our own Miriam Johnson, who is our intern, but she is so talented, an amazing young woman, is bringing her dance talent and skill along with some friends of hers who are poets and dancers, who will be presenting a piece that's considering rebellion through an artistic experience. So we encourage you to come back next week, Saturday, for that event. We have a whole host of other programs and events that are going on. Check us out at thewright.org. If you are not a member, I'm sure many of you already are members, but if you are not, please do join us as members. Every institution is as strong as its membership, and we need you all to build our strength and our numbers. And we want to thank you. If you haven't completed an evaluation, or if you are interested in doing so, our wonderful volunteer, Miss Monica, hey mama, is over there. Please fill out an evaluation to let us know how you appreciated this event, because we do read those evaluations and we